Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of West Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1924. The coal dust hung thick in the air of Matewan, a small mining town nestled deep within the rugged mountains of Mingo County, West Virginia. The Appalachian Hollows, or Hollers as the locals called them, kept their secrets well, none more so than the story of the Whitaker family, whose tale begins not with a scream or gunshot, but with the simple closing of a door. On December 17, 1924, Elijah Whitaker, the patriarch of the family, walked into the Matewan General Store at exactly 2:47 p.m., according to the mechanical clock that still hangs above what is now a hardware store. Witnesses described him as calm, even pleasant, buying supplies for what he said would be a mighty cold winter. The receipt, preserved in county records, shows purchases of flour, salt, kerosene, ammunition, and curiously, 4 padlocks. What no one knew then was that Elijah would not be seen in town again for nearly 7 months. The Whitaker homestead stood about 8 miles outside town, up Blackberry Mountain, along what locals called the Old Mine Trail. It was a 2-story timber frame house built by Elijah's father in the 1880s during the first coal boom. The property included 40 acres of woodland, a small creek, and what remained of an abandoned mine shaft that predated proper record-keeping. The family kept to themselves, as was not uncommon in those parts. Neighbors were sparse, the closest being the Henderson family, who lived about a mile down the mountain. Before the events of that winter, the Whitakers were known, if at all, as quiet folk who attended the Matewan Baptist Church on the first Sunday of each month. His wife, Martha, rarely came to town, suffering as she did from what was then called nervous exhaustion. The couple had 3 adult individuals still living with them: Thomas, 27, the eldest son who had returned from the Great War with a pronounced limp, and what the doctor in Charleston had diagnosed as shell shock; Abigail, 25, who had once been engaged to a mine engineer from Pennsylvania before he abruptly left the region; and Isaiah, 22, the youngest, who worked alongside his father at the mine. Elijah worked as a foreman at the Blackberry Creek Mine, one of the few men who didn't participate in the mine wars that had torn through Matewan just a few years prior. By all accounts, the Whitakers lived a hard but ordinary Appalachian existence. Yet something about them had always unsettled the town. Perhaps it was the way Martha would stare vacantly during church services, or how Isaiah would sometimes stop mid-conversation, cocking his head as if listening to distant voices. Or maybe it was the stories that Elijah's own father had brought strange practices with him from the old country, though no one seemed to agree on which country that was. The winter of 1924-1925 was particularly brutal in West Virginia. Record snowfalls isolated communities for weeks. The Matewan Gazette reported temperatures dropping to 20 degrees below zero in January. It was not unusual for families in the hollers to go unseen until the spring thaw. So the absence of the Whitakers raised no immediate concerns. It wasn't until late April that Cecil Henderson, returning from a hunting trip, noticed something unusual about the Whitaker property. The spring crops hadn't been planted. The chimney showed no signs of recent fires, despite the lingering mountain chill. Most troubling, according to Henderson's later testimony to the county sheriff, was the unnatural silence. No chickens, no dogs barking. Like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Henderson approached the house and found all doors secured with padlocks, the same ones presumably that Elijah had purchased in December. The windows on the ground floor had been boarded from the inside. Henderson would later tell Sheriff Moore that he called out several times before deciding something was wrong. He returned to town and reported his concerns. On May 2, 1925, Sheriff Moore, accompanied by Deputy Collins and Dr. William Haskins, the county's only physician, made the journey up to the Whitaker homestead. What they found would become the subject of whispered conversations in Matewan for decades to come. The front door's padlock had to be broken. The stale air that greeted them carried an odor that Dr. Haskins, a veteran of the Great War field hospitals, recognized immediately. The sheriff's official report, filed in the Mingo County Courthouse and photocopied in 1968 before a basement flood damaged the original, describes the interior as in a state of disarray suggesting extended habitation without proper maintenance. The most immediately noticeable feature was the walls. Every inch of available space in the front room had been covered with writing, Bible verses primarily, interspersed with what appeared to be personal observations. The handwriting analysis, conducted informally by Matewan's schoolteacher, Miss Adeline Porter, suggested at least 3 different hands, presumably Thomas, Abigail, and Isaiah. The kitchen contained plates with traces of food that had long since decayed. The family Bible lay open on the table to the book of Revelation. Several pages had been torn out and were found pinned to various walls throughout the house. Scratched into the wooden tabletop was a crude map of what appeared to be the Blackberry Creek Mine, with the north tunnel marked repeatedly with a symbol resembling an elongated diamond. Upstairs, the investigators found the bedroom doors secured from the outside with simple sliding bolts. Inside the master bedroom, Martha Whitaker was found deceased, apparently from natural causes related to malnutrition and exposure. Dr. E. Haskins estimated she had been dead for approximately 2 months. Her body showed unusual discoloration around the fingertips and toes, blackened, but not in the manner of frostbite. When touched, these areas were said to have a texture like fine sandpaper. But it was the discovery in the basement that generated the most confusion. A portion of the earthen floor had been excavated to a depth of nearly 6 feet. At the bottom of this pit, seated in a handmade wooden chair, was Elijah Whitaker, alive but severely malnourished and in a state of what Dr. Haskins described as catatonic melancholia. He did not respond to questions and appeared unaware of his surroundings. Around the pit, arranged in a perfect circle, were 27 candles, all burned down to stubs. Between each candle lay a small object, a tooth, a button, a coal fragment, a lock of hair. Dr. A. Haskins noted in his medical report that Elijah's hands were covered in dried mud, his fingernails worn down to the quick, as if he had been digging with his bare hands. Of Thomas, Abigail, and Isaiah, there was no immediate sign. The investigation that followed would reveal a pattern of events so disturbing that many Matewan residents refused to discuss them openly. What became known came primarily through official documents, personal journals discovered in the house, and the eventual testimonies of those who survived. From Thomas's journal recovered from beneath a floorboard in his bedroom. Father says the mountain is changing, says he hears it at night when he's down in the shaft. I told him it's just the wood creaking, the way old mines do. But he showed me his hands today. The skin is different, harder, like the coal itself. When I touched it, I felt something move beneath the surface, not blood or muscle, but something granular and shifting. Another entry, dated January 23, 1925. The sound is constant now, a scraping that seems to come from inside the walls. Isaiah says it's the mountain trying to reach us, but I think it's rats. I've set traps in the attic. Abigail doesn't speak anymore. She sits by the window for hours, staring at the mine entrance on the hillside. Her skin is changing, too, patches on her neck and arms turning gray and rough. When I asked her about it, she just smiled and said, "It's making room for me." From Abigail's sewing kit, a folded note dated January 14th, 1925. Mother won't eat. Says the food tastes like earth. Isaiah brought back something from the old shaft yesterday. He won't show me, but I heard it making sounds in his room last night, scratching. Thomas says we should leave, but where would we go? The snow is up to the windows now, and the truth is, I don't think I want to leave anymore. There's a comfort in the sounds from the walls, like they're calling my name in a language I'm just beginning to understand. A second note, undated but apparently written later, given the deterioration in handwriting. I dream of tunnels now, endless passages through darkness where I can finally breathe. My lungs hurt in the open air. Too much space, too much light. Isaiah says it's almost time. The change is nearly complete. Thomas fought it last night, tried to break out through the kitchen window. Father dragged him to the basement. I can hear him shouting, but his voice sounds different now. Rougher, like stones grinding together. Mother doesn't move from her bed anymore. Her skin is hard to the touch. Sometimes I think she's already become part of the house. Most revealing was a ledger found in what appeared to be Elijah's handwriting, detailing strange observations from his time in the mine. The entries begin normally enough in October 1924, noting production outputs and safety concerns. By November, they take a troubling turn. Found unusual coal formation in the North Tunnel. Black, but with striations unlike anything I've seen in 30 years of mining. When struck, it resonates differently. The men won't go near it. November 15, 1924. Filed report with the company office about possible new coal seam in North Tunnel. Their geologist, Harmon, came to inspect. He took samples but seemed troubled. Said he'd never seen coal with that structure, almost crystalline, with threads of some pale mineral running through it. When I asked if it was valuable, he just shook his head and said, "That depends on what you value, mister." Whitaker. November 29, 1924. 3 men reported hearing voices in the North Tunnel today. Said it sounded like whispering in a foreign language. I spent an hour there after they left and heard nothing but the usual settling of the mountain. Still, I've noticed the men avoiding that section. Even the mules refuse to enter that part of the shaft, ears laid back, eyes rolling. December 10, 1924. Isaiah came with me to examine the formation today. He placed his hand on it and said he could feel it pulsing. I told him that was nonsense, but when I touched it myself, there is something not right about that seam. It's warmer than it should be. I've sealed off that section and told the company it's due to dangerous methane levels. December 12, 1924. Isaiah has been sneaking into the North Tunnel at night. Found his lantern there this morning, still warm. When confronted, he denied it, but there was coal dust under his fingernails and something else, a black residue that seems to shimmer in certain light. His eyes look different. The whites are darker somehow, as if the coal dust has gotten into his blood. The final entry, dated December 16th, the day before his last appearance in town. Isaiah brought something home from the seam, says he chipped it off when I wasn't looking. It's no bigger than a walnut, but it's changing, growing. And the sound it makes, not quite audible, more felt than heard. Martha says it's the devil's work and wants it out of the house. Thomas agrees. But Isaiah, there's something wrong with my boy now, the way he looks at it, the way he listens to it. And Abigail is starting to look at it the same way. Tomorrow, I'll buy what we need and lock us in until spring. By then, I'll know what to do. What happened in the intervening months can only be pieced together through fragmentary evidence. The writing on the walls tells part of the story, a descent into collective paranoia and religious fervor. Biblical passages concerning judgment and purification predominate, suggesting the family believed themselves to be experiencing divine testing or punishment. Of particular interest to investigators was a section of wall in the dining room where the same verse from Isaiah had been written repeatedly, hundreds of times in increasingly erratic handwriting. For behold, the Lord will come in fire, and his chariots like the whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. Between each repetition of the verse was a small, carefully drawn symbol, matching the elongated diamond found on the kitchen table map. Dr. Stanley Werner, a folklorist from West Virginia University, who examined photographs of the walls in 1957, identified the symbol as a variation of a pre-Christian European mining sign meant to warn of hungry earth, places where tunnels were prone to unexpected collapse, as if the mountain itself were consuming the miners. Dr. Haskins's examination of Elijah revealed unusual markings on his palms and the soles of his feet, symmetrical patterns of hardened skin that the doctor could not readily explain. The tissue presents as calloused but with an unusual crystalline quality, he noted in his medical report, more resembling mineral deposit than human tissue. Similar markings were found on Martha's body, primarily concentrated around her joints and spine. For 3 days, Elijah remained in his unresponsive state, neither speaking nor acknowledging his surroundings. He was transferred to the State Mental Hospital in Weston, where Dr. Howard Garrison took an interest in his case. According to hospital records, Elijah would occasionally press his hands against the stone walls of his room, fingers splayed, remaining in that position for hours. Nursing staff reported that the walls where he touched them developed a slight discoloration, darker patches that, when examined closely, seemed to have a faintly granular texture. On the 4th day, according to hospital records, Elijah spoke his first and only words since being found. They went back to the mountain. They always belonged to the mountain. We all do in the end. The coal doesn't burn, you know. It remembers. It waits. And now it's found a way back to the surface. He died the following morning of what was officially recorded as heart failure. The attending physician noted that Elijah's final moments were marked by extreme physical distress, the body becoming rigid as if under enormous pressure. An autopsy was performed, but the results were never made public. The hospital records indicate only that Elijah's remains were cremated rather than returned to Matewan for burial by order of the State Health Department. The search for the missing Whitaker siblings intensified following Elijah's death. Sheriff Moore organized a search party that combed the Whitaker property and surrounding forest for any sign of Thomas, Abigail, or Isaiah. On May 12, 1925, they discovered a trail leading from the house to the abandoned mine shaft mentioned in Elijah's ledger. The entrance to the shaft had been enlarged recently, with fresh tool marks visible on the surrounding rock. Inside, the search party found evidence of regular human activity: food wrappers, a kerosene lamp, discarded clothing. They ventured approximately 200 yards into the mountain before reaching a cave-in that blocked further progress. Of particular note in Deputy Collins's report was the discovery of Isaiah's work boots, neatly placed side by side facing the cave-in, as if he had stepped out of them deliberately before proceeding barefoot into whatever lay beyond. Next to the boots was a small leather-bound book containing handwritten entries, presumably Isaiah's journal. The entries begin coherently enough, detailing his work in the mine and his growing fascination with the unusual coal seam. By February 1925, they become increasingly disjointed. February 7, 1925. The piece grows larger each day. Father keeps it locked in the root cellar, but I can hear it calling. Not in words exactly, but in feelings, impressions, images of tunnels and darkness and a kind of peace I've never known above ground. I've been having the dreams, too, of becoming something else, something that belongs to the deep places. February 19, 1925. Thomas tried to destroy it today, smashed it with Father's hammer, but it didn't break, it divided, like each piece was alive and separate. Father locked Thomas in the basement afterward, says he's become dangerous. But I saw Thomas's hands when they brought him up for supper. The blackness is spreading across his palms. He's changing too, whether he wants to or not. March 8, 1925. Abigail understands now. She's been touching the pieces, listening to them. Her fingertips have turned black and hard like mine. We've been scratching at the walls at night, not to escape, to practice, learning how it will feel when we finally go deep enough. Mother won't look at us anymore. She stays in bed face to the wall. But I've seen the darkness spreading up her spine when Father bathes her. She's fighting it, but the mountain always wins. March 17, 1925. Father found our tunnel behind the pantry shelf today, filled it in and beat me with his belt, said we were inviting the devil into the house. But it's not the devil. It's older than sin, older than man. It's the earth remembering what we're made of, wanting us back. I've hidden another piece under the floorboards in my room. I press my ear against it at night. It tells me secrets about what waits for us in the deep dark. The final entry, dated April 3, 1925, reads, "Thomas tried to destroy it, but it was already too late. The peace I brought home was just a seed. The real growth is happening inside us now." Abigail understands. I can see it in her eyes, the same change that's happening to me. The hunger for the dark, for the pressure of earth all around. Thomas fought it the longest, but last night I heard him scratching at his bedroom wall, trying to dig through. Father was right to lock us in, but wrong about the reason. He thought he was protecting the town from us. Really, he was giving us time to complete the change. The mountain doesn't want the town. It just wants us. Its children. We're going home tonight. Below this final entry was a crude drawing of 3 human figures standing before what appeared to be a mine entrance. Their bodies were partially shaded in, the darkness spreading from their extremities inward, as if they were being gradually consumed by shadow. The investigation officially concluded on June 24, 1925, when Sheriff Moore declared Thomas, Abigail, and Isaiah Whitaker missing, presumed deceased. The prevailing theory, as presented to the county commissioner, was that the family had succumbed to coal sickness, a colloquial term for the mental deterioration sometimes observed in mining communities, attributed to a combination of carbon monoxide exposure, malnutrition, and the psychological strain of mining life. The Matewan Gazette published only a brief article about the case, noting that the unfortunate Whitaker family met with tragedy this past winter with Mrs. Martha Whitaker and Mr. Elijah Whitaker deceased, and their adult relations missing in the mountains. There was no mention of the unusual circumstances or the extensive writing on the walls. When pressed by a reporter from the larger Huntington newspaper, Sheriff Moore stated only that some things are better left undisturbed. The case might have been forgotten entirely were it not for a geological survey conducted in 1952 by the Eastern Coal Company, which was considering reopening the old Blackberry Creek mine. The survey team, led by Dr. James Harlow of West Virginia University, discovered unusual formations in the North Tunnel, precisely where Elijah had reported the strange coal seam. Dr. Harlow's report, filed with the university but never published, described the formations as anomalous coal structures with unexplained organic components. Photographs included with the report show what appears to be standard coal veins, interspersed with crystalline structures that reflect light in unusual patterns. More disturbing are the images of what Dr. Harlow termed inclusion bodies, areas where the coal contained shapes resembling fossilized organic material, but with a structure unlike any known plant matter typically found in coal deposits. Samples were taken for further analysis, but the results of these tests are notably absent from university records. What is known is that Dr. Harlow abruptly abandoned the project, resigning his position at the university to take up a teaching post in Arizona. When contacted by a local historian in 1967, Dr. Harlow refused to discuss the Blackberry Creek mine or the Whitaker case, saying only, "Some veins should never be tapped. Some things buried in the earth should stay buried." According to Harold Campbell, a member of the 1952 survey team who spoke to researchers in the 1960s, Dr. Harlow became increasingly agitated during their time in the mine. He kept saying the formations weren't natural, that they showed evidence of deliberate arrangement, like something had been constructing them. On our last day there, he spent hours photographing a section of wall where he claimed the coal had formed into patterns that resembled human faces. I couldn't see it myself, but Harlow was insistent. He said they were growing, changing slightly each day we returned. That night at the hotel, he burned all his notes and told us the project was finished. Next morning, he was gone. The Whitaker property remained abandoned until 1963, when it was purchased by the Mingo County Historical Society with the intention of restoring it as a museum dedicated to coal mining heritage. The restoration never materialized. According to Society minutes, workers sent to clear the property reported feeling uncomfortable and watched. Several refused to return after the first day. The foreman, Joseph Miller, claimed the house itself seemed to resist their efforts. Tools would disappear, newly repaired sections would be found damaged the next morning, and the writing on the walls, though faded, appeared to change position overnight. Most troubling was the discovery made when workers attempted to fill in the pit in the basement where Elijah had been found. Upon digging, they discovered that it extended far deeper than initially reported, at least 20 feet down before opening into what appeared to be a natural cave system. Investigation of this system was abandoned when 2 workers reported hearing voices emanating from the darkness. Not echo or imagination, according to Miller's report to the Historical Society, but actual conversations in whispers, like people talking just around a corner. The property was sold again in 1965 to a private owner who demolished the house after a series of unexplained structural failures. The land remains vacant to this day, with locals referring to it simply as the Bad Acre. Vegetation grows poorly there, and wildlife avoids the area entirely. According to local rumor, compasses behave erratically on the property, and electronic equipment frequently malfunctions. In the summer of 1967, Jane Porter, granddaughter of the school teacher who had analyzed the handwriting on the Whitaker walls, began researching the case for her master's thesis in Appalachian Studies at Marshall University. Her work, Isolation and Delusion in Coal Mining Communities, the Whitaker Case Study, represented the first academic examination of the events. Porter's research led her to interview several elderly Matewan residents who remembered the Whitakers. Most declined to speak on record, but one, Harold Hatfield, who had worked alongside Elijah and Isaiah at the mine, offered a perspective that Porter found significant enough to include in her thesis. There was something in that north tunnel that shouldn't have been there. We all felt it. Most of us refused to work that section, even before Elijah closed it off. The air was different there, heavier somehow. And the sounds, coal shifts and settles, that's normal. But what we heard in that tunnel wasn't settling. It was moving, deliberately moving. Isaiah was the only one who didn't seem bothered by it. In fact, he'd volunteer to work that section alone. Used to catch him just standing there, pressing his ear against the coal face like he was listening to something. After a while, some of the men started saying Isaiah had mountain blood, old mining superstition about people who were called to the deep places. Never believed in such nonsense myself, but I'll tell you this. The last time I saw Isaiah, about a week before the family disappeared from town, his eyes had changed. Looked like there was coal dust floating behind them, even though his face was clean. Porter also discovered medical records indicating that several miners who had worked the north tunnel of the Blackberry Creek mine in late 1924 sought treatment for an unusual skin condition, patches of hardened, darkened tissue, primarily on their hands and forearms. Dr. Hupp. Haskins's notes described the condition as resembling severe callousing, but with an uncharacteristic texture and resistance to treatment. All affected miners had either left the area by 1926 or died of causes listed as respiratory failure. Perhaps most significant was Porter's discovery of a sealed file in the State Department of Health archives related to Elijah Whitaker's autopsy. Although she was denied access to the complete file, she was able to view a cover letter written by the medical examiner, Dr. Lewitt Patterson, requesting special containment procedures for the body. The letter mentioned unusual post-mortem mineralization of soft tissues and non-standard particulate matter in the bloodstream and organs. It concluded with a recommendation that all biological material be subjected to complete destruction via high-temperature incineration, and that no samples be preserved for further study given the apparent self-propagating nature of the contamination. Porter's thesis was submitted in August 1968, but was never published. According to Marshall University records, it was withdrawn at the author's request. Porter herself left West Virginia shortly thereafter, and attempts to locate her by subsequent researchers have been unsuccessful. Her final known communication was a letter to her faculty advisor, Dr. William Harrison, in which she wrote, "I believe I'm being followed. Someone has been going through my research materials when I'm not home. Last night I found coal dust on my papers, though I've never brought samples into the house. I'm leaving for my sisters in Oregon tomorrow. I've come to believe that some stories aren't meant to be told, not because they're false, but because they're unfinished." The most recent documented investigation into the Whitaker case occurred in 1969, when journalist Samuel Kincaid of the Huntington Herald-Dispatch began researching a series of articles on Appalachian mining folklore. Kincaid's interest was piqued by references to the Hungry Mountain of Matewan, a local legend about a section of Blackberry Mountain that was said to call to certain people and change them into something that belongs below. Kincaid's notes, preserved in the newspaper's archives, indicate he traveled to Matewan and attempted to locate the sealed north tunnel of the Blackberry Creek mine. Local guides refused to take him to the site. Undeterred, Kincaid set out alone, equipped with maps from the 1952 Geological Survey. He never returned from this expedition. A search and rescue operation recovered his camera and notebook approximately half a mile into the old mine shaft, along with evidence suggesting he had broken through the cave-in that had stopped the original search party in 1925. Beyond that point, no trace of Kincaid was ever found. The final page of his recovered notebook contains a hastily written entry. Tunnel opens into larger chamber. Unusual formations on walls, not mineral deposits. Texturing resembles organic patterns. Skin-like. Air quality poor but breathable. Temperature higher than expected at this depth. Sound of water, but can't locate source. Something moved in the darkness ahead. Not an animal. Too fluid. Almost like the wall itself shifted. Following to investigate. The photographs from Kincaid's camera, developed by the newspaper, show progressively stranger formations as he moved deeper into the mine. The final 3 exposures are particularly disturbing. The first shows what appears to be a coal seam with unnatural striations, pale veins running through the blackness in patterns that, according to the forensic pathologist who examined the photos in 1970, bear striking resemblance to human vascular systems. The second photo captures what Kincaid described as a wall texture, a section of the mine that appears to be covered in a material with the consistency of rough skin, complete with what look like pore-like indentations. The pathologist report noted that while various fungal or bacterial colonies can create similar textures in cave systems, the regularity and pattern of these structures is inconsistent with known natural formations. The third and final photograph is largely obscured by what appears to be Kincaid's thumb covering most of the lens, likely taken in haste or by accident. What is visible in the uncovered portion is interpreted differently by various experts who have examined it. Some see merely shadows and rock formations. Others, including Dr. Patricia Wolfe of Johns Hopkins University, who studied the photograph in 1972, describe seeing what appears to be a human silhouette partially embedded in or emerging from the cave wall, with the surrounding rock seeming to flow like liquid around the form. The Whitaker case was officially closed in 1969, following the disappearance of Kincaid. The Blackberry Creek mine was permanently sealed by state authorities, ostensibly due to environmental concerns. The records related to the case were archived in the State Historical Society in Charleston and largely forgotten. Yet in the hollers around Matewan, the story persists in whispered conversations. Some older residents still refuse to walk the old mine trail after dark. Others claim that on particularly still nights, when the mountain air hangs heavy with moisture, they can hear faint scratching sounds coming from deep within Blackberry Mountain, as if something is still trying to dig its way out, or perhaps, as one elderly resident suggested, trying to dig its way further in. In 1965, a survey team mapping underground water sources in Mingo County reported unusual readings near the old Whitaker property. Their sonar equipment indicated what appeared to be a network of tunnels or cavities extending far deeper into the mountain than any known mine shaft should reach. More puzzling was the discovery that these cavities appeared to be slowly expanding, changing shape in ways that the geological team could not explain through natural processes. The team's report recommended further investigation, but funding was never allocated. There is a final curious footnote to the Whitaker story. In the spring of 1968, a hiker reported encountering a strange woman on the slopes of Blackberry Mountain, not far from where the Whitaker home once stood. He described her as thin to the point of emaciation, with long gray hair and coal-black eyes. She was barefoot despite the rocky terrain and seemed to be gathering plants. When he called out to her, she turned and stared at him for a long moment before retreating into the forest with surprising speed. The hiker, convinced she was in distress, reported the sighting to the local sheriff's office. A deputy was dispatched but found no trace of the woman. What the deputy did find, however, was a small clearing containing what appeared to be personal items arranged in a deliberate pattern. A tarnished silver hairbrush with the initials AW, a man's pocket watch stopped at 247, and a chunk of coal unlike any typically found in the region, shot through with pale vein-like striations that caught the light in unusual ways. The items were brought to the sheriff's office but disappeared from the evidence room 3 days later. The deputy who found them resigned his position shortly thereafter and left the state. No official record of this incident exists beyond a brief mention in the daily logbook, which notes only, "Investigated report of vagrant woman on Blackberry Mountain. No subject located. Miskey, abandoned property recovered." To this day, some locals insist the woman was Abigail Whitaker, somehow surviving all those years in the wilderness. Others suggest a more troubling possibility that whatever transformation Isaiah wrote about in his final journal entry had indeed occurred, and that the Whitaker siblings had become something neither fully human nor entirely separate from the mountain that had claimed them. During the coal boom of the early 1950s, when new mining operations were being established throughout Mingo County, workers reported occasional strange sightings in the deepest tunnels, figures that moved differently than people should, with joints that seemed too fluid and skin that blended with the darkness. These accounts were dismissed as instances of mining hysteria, a documented phenomenon where the isolation and poor air quality of deep mines can cause visual and auditory hallucinations. Yet one account, recorded in an internal company memo from the Black Diamond Coal Corporation in 1953, stands out for its specificity. A night watchman named Frank Collins reported encountering 3 individuals attempting to enter a sealed tunnel adjacent to the old Blackberry Creek mine. When confronted, they turned toward him in unison, moving with what Collins described as perfect coordination, like they shared one mind. Their faces, he claimed, were normal enough at first glance, but wrong somehow. The features didn't move right when they spoke. Collins raised his shotgun and ordered them to leave, at which point they retreated not toward the mine exit, but deeper into the tunnels, moving faster than seemed possible in the darkness. The memo concludes with a notation that Collins was relieved of duty due to signs of mental instability and consumption of alcohol on the job. However, a handwritten addendum, initialed by the mine superintendent, notes, "Check personnel records from Blackberry Creek operation pre-1925. Collins claims one of the trespassers called him by name, said they'd worked together before. Says it was Isaiah Whitaker, though that's clearly impossible." What really happened to the Whitaker family in the winter of 1924-1925? Was it simply a tragic case of isolation and mental deterioration, as official records suggest? Or was there something in that unusual seam of coal, something that changed them in ways science cannot explain? The mountain keeps its secrets well. The old mine shaft remains sealed, the property vacant, the official records gathering dust in state archives. But for those who know where to look, the signs are still there. In the unusually barren patch of forest where the house once stood, in the water of Blackberry Creek that occasionally runs black even when there's been no mining for decades, and in the reluctance of locals to speak the Whitaker name after sunset. Perhaps most telling is what happened to the original samples from Dr. Harlow's 1952 geological survey. According to a laboratory assistant who spoke anonymously to Jane Porter during her research, the coal specimens began to change in storage, developing texture and patterns that coal simply should not have. Most disturbing, she claimed, was finding one sample case empty, its glass front broken from the inside out, with a trail of black dust leading to a ventilation duct. Her statement, recorded in Porter's research notes but omitted from the thesis, ends with an observation that perhaps best encapsulates the lingering unease surrounding the Whitaker case. The mountain wanted them back, all of them, even the pieces they tried to take away. In the spring of 1963, a group of geology students from West Virginia University conducted unauthorized research at the abandoned Blackberry Creek mine as part of a class project on Appalachian coal formations. Their professor had explicitly forbidden them from entering the sealed North Tunnel, but curiosity led 3 students to break through the barricade. Only 2 returned. The official report cites a tunnel collapse as the cause of death for James Harkins, age 22, whose body was never recovered. However, the surviving students' accounts tell a different story. In sworn statements to the county sheriff, both described reaching a large chamber where the coal seemed alive somehow, shifting slightly when you weren't looking directly at it. They claimed Harkins became separated from them after insisting on collecting samples from a particularly unusual formation, one that he said resembled faces pressed against the rock as if trying to emerge. According to Martin Weber, one of the survivors, we heard Jim scream, but it was cut off suddenly. When we turned back, our flashlight showed the tunnel was different, narrower, with the walls textured in ways that weren't natural. We called for Jim but heard nothing. Then we noticed the wall where he'd been standing seemed thicker, bulging outward slightly, and there was something embedded in it, something that looked like the sleeve of Jim's jacket disappearing into solid rock as if he'd been absorbed somehow. We ran. I don't care if nobody believes us. I know what I saw. The university quickly suppressed the incident, threatening academic expulsion for any student who spoke publicly about it. The North Tunnel was resealed with concrete rather than the previous wooden barricade, and signs warning of lethal gas were posted throughout the area. In 1966, Victor Reynolds, an amateur folklorist collecting mining superstitions throughout Appalachia, documented a belief among older miners in Mingo County that certain coal seams contained what they called old memories, remnants of ancient life that had been compressed and transformed, but not entirely destroyed by the coal-forming process. These seams were said to recognize certain individuals, usually those with deep family connections to mining, and attempt to reclaim them. Reynolds initially dismissed these accounts as simple superstition until he encountered nearly identical beliefs in mining communities hundreds of miles apart, with no apparent connection or communication between them. More intriguing was his discovery that in each community where such beliefs existed, there were stories of individuals or families who had gone back to the mountain, disappeared in circumstances similar to the Whitakers, though none so well documented. In his unpublished manuscript, Voices from the Deep, Mining Folklore of Appalachia, Reynolds writes, the consistency of these accounts suggests either a shared cultural origin for the superstition or, more troublingly, a shared experience that generated similar beliefs independently. What particularly struck me was the description of the changing, a process where those called by the mountain gradually developed hardened skin, darkened eyes, and an aversion to sunlight and open spaces. In all cases, those experiencing these changes were said to eventually disappear into abandoned mines or natural cave systems, never to be seen again, or, in some accounts, seen years later, fundamentally altered in appearance and behavior. The manuscript includes a detailed comparison of these accounts with the Whitaker case, noting the striking similarities. Reynolds submitted the work to several academic publishers, but was consistently rejected. He eventually abandoned the project after experiencing what he described in correspondence with a colleague as unusual incidents at his home. I find coal dust on my papers in the morning, though there is no coal burned or stored in the house. The tap water runs black briefly when first turned on. Most disturbing, I've twice now awakened to find perfect handprints on my bedroom wall, handprints that appear to emerge from within the plaster itself. In decades since, Matewan has changed. The mines have closed, the population dwindled. Few remain who remember the Whitakers firsthand, yet something of their story lingers, like coal dust in the lungs, impossible to fully expel. In 1989, a development company purchased a large tract of land, including the former Whitaker property, with plans to build vacation cabins along Blackberry Creek. The project was abandoned after multiple equipment failures and an unusually high rate of worker injuries. The project manager, Dale Morris, told the Williamson Daily News that they encountered unusual ground conditions when attempting to lay foundations. The soil was wrong, too dense in some places, too loose in others, and there was something about the place that the men didn't like. Nobody would say it outright, but nobody wanted to be there after sunset. More recently, in 2005, an environmental assessment team from the State Department of Natural Resources conducted water quality tests along Blackberry Creek as part of a wider study of mining impacts on Appalachian watersheds. Their report noted elevated levels of unusual mineral compounds near the site of the old Blackberry Creek mine, compounds not typically associated with coal mining operations. More concerning were trace amounts of organic material that the team's biologist, Dr. Karen Jenkins, described as structurally similar to human tissue, but with significant molecular abnormalities. Follow-up studies were recommended but never funded. Dr. Jenkins left her position with the DNR shortly after submitting the report and has declined all requests for interviews from subsequent researchers. Her resignation letter, obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 2012, contains a curious passage. I no longer feel capable of performing my duties with the necessary objectivity. Some aspects of the Blackberry Creek findings have caused me to question fundamental assumptions about the distinction between organic and inorganic matter. Local residents continue to report occasional strange sightings on or near Blackberry Mountain. Shadowy figures that move with unusual fluidity, unexplained lights deep in the abandoned mine areas, and most commonly, the sound of scratching or tapping from inside the sealed mine entrances. These accounts are typically dismissed as imagination or teenagers perpetuating local legends to frighten one another. Yet one incident from 2018 is harder to explain. Mark Collins, a surveyor working for a timber company, was mapping boundaries on the north face of Blackberry Mountain when he discovered what appeared to be a fresh mine entrance, one not marked on any of his maps. Curious, he ventured a short distance inside, only to find himself in a chamber with unusual wall formations that he described in his field report as almost sculptural, like something had molded the rock into deliberate patterns. Most unsettling was his description of what appeared to be handprints or impressions of human forms embedded in the rock walls, as if people had pressed themselves into the stone while it was still soft, leaving perfect negative impressions. Collins took several photographs before his phone malfunctioned. When he returned the next day with colleagues, the entrance could not be located despite extensive searching. The photographs on his phone had been corrupted beyond recovery, showing only black frames with occasional streaks of white that technical analysts could not explain. And sometimes, in the depths of winter, when snow isolates the hollers and darkness comes early to the mountains of West Virginia, residents of Matewan still report hearing sounds from Blackberry Mountain. Not quite human voices, but something that began as human once, long ago before the mountain called it home. The most compelling evidence that something truly unexplainable happened to the Whitaker family comes from an unexpected source, a series of audio recordings made in 1976 by Dr. Robert Maxwell, a geophysicist studying subsurface anomalies in abandoned mining regions. Maxwell placed sensitive microphones and vibration detectors throughout the Blackberry Mountain area as part of a project monitoring potential land subsidence. The recordings, archived at West Virginia University's Department of Geology and recently digitized, contain mostly expected sounds: the settling of earth, underground water movement, distant machinery. But one tape labeled simply Site 7 North Blackberry 02-17-0345 contains approximately 9 minutes of what Maxwell's notes describe as possible human vocalizations of unknown origin. The sounds begin as rhythmic tapping, gradually evolving into what seems to be multiple voices, speaking or chanting in overlapping patterns. The speech, if it is speech, is unintelligible, described by linguistic analysts as structurally similar to English but fundamentally altered, as if the vocal apparatus producing it was no longer fully human. Most disturbing are moments when three distinct voices seem to speak in perfect unison, creating harmonic overtones that acoustic engineers have stated should not be possible from human vocal cords. Dr. Maxwell's research was discontinued after he reported increasingly unusual equipment failures and unexplained health issues among his team members, persistent respiratory problems, skin irritations, and in 2 cases, what his medical notes describe as unusual darkening and hardening of tissue at the extremities. Maxwell himself was hospitalized briefly with symptoms that physicians at Charleston Memorial Hospital compared to acute radiation exposure, though no radiation source was ever identified. The final page of Maxwell's field journal, now in the possession of his daughter, contains a hastily written note. They're still here, still changing, still waiting. The mountain isn't hungry, it's patient. In recent years, advanced geological surveys using ground-penetrating radar have revealed that the cave system beneath Blackberry Mountain is far more extensive than previously believed, extending at least 30 miles in various directions, and reaching depths of over 3,000 feet. More puzzling is evidence suggesting that portions of this system appear to be expanding through means inconsistent with known geological processes, as if the mountain itself is gradually hollowing out from within. Environmental scientists monitoring the area have documented other unexplained phenomena: unusually rapid vegetation changes near the old mine entrances, with native plants being replaced by rare fungal species normally found only in deep cave systems, unexplained fluctuations in local magnetic fields that interfere with electronic equipment, and perhaps most tellingly, a gradual but measurable increase in the mountain's coal content, contrary to all geological expectations. As one researcher from the U.S. Geological Survey noted in a 2019 report, later redacted from public versions, the Blackberry Mountain coal formations appear to be expanding rather than depleting, a finding that contradicts fundamental principles of geological science. More concerning is the unusual molecular structure of these new formations, which contain organic compounds suggesting some form of ongoing biological process within what should be inert mineral material. Perhaps the final word on the Whitaker case should go to Elijah Whitaker himself. In 2015, a historian researching mining communities discovered a previously unknown letter written by Elijah to his brother in Ohio, dated November 30th, 1924, just weeks before the family's isolation began. The letter, now preserved in the West Virginia State Archives, shows a man struggling to articulate something beyond his comprehension. Something is changing in the mountain, James, not just the coal seam, though that's where it started. I see it in Isaiah now, too. The way he watches the mine entrance from his window, the way his skin is changing, rougher, darker, in patches. The doctor says it's just coal dust that won't wash off, but it's more than that. It's like the mountain is reaching out through him somehow. Martha says we should leave, head to Ohio, and stay with you for a while. Maybe she's right, but I can't help feeling it would follow us. The other night, I found Isaiah sleepwalking, his hands pressed against the bedroom wall, fingers digging into the wood like he was trying to tunnel through. When I woke him, he looked at me with such confusion. James said he'd been dreaming of tunnels where he could finally breathe properly, where the light didn't hurt his eyes anymore. I've worked coal all my life, same as father and grandfather before me. I always thought I understood the mountain. Now I wonder if it's been understanding us all along, learning from us, waiting for something. The old-timers talked about hungry mountains that would call to certain folk. I never believed such tales. Now I'm not so certain. If we don't come for Christmas as promised, come looking for us, James. But be careful when you do. Don't touch anything strange you might find in the house. And whatever you do, don't go into the mine. Some things buried in the earth want to stay buried. Others want to spread. The letter was never sent. It was found in Elijah's coat pocket when his body was examined at the Weston Hospital. The attending physician, noting the letter's disturbing content, chose to omit it from official records, keeping it as a personal curiosity until his death in 1965. And so, the Whitaker case remains, not solved, not closed, but suspended in a state of troubling ambiguity. Was it mass hysteria triggered by isolation and the psychological strain of mining life? Was it some environmental toxin in the unusual coal seam affecting the family's minds and bodies? Or was it something else entirely, something that challenges our understanding of what lies beneath the ancient mountains of Appalachia? The mountain keeps its secrets. The sealed mine entrances stand as silent warnings. The vacant property remains overgrown, avoided by locals. And deep within Blackberry Mountain, something waits, patient, changing, remembering. Something that was once the Whitaker family before the mountain called them home. In the stillness of winter, when sound carries far across the snow-covered hollers, those who live near Blackberry Mountain sometimes report hearing faint rhythmic tapping from deep within the earth. The old-timers say it's just the mountain settling. Others who remember the stories recognize it as something else, the sound of tunneling, of transformation continuing in the darkness, of the mountain slowly, patiently, making room for more of its children to come home.